Good morning, everybody. All right, so today on Homeschool Support on Facebook Live, we're going to be talking about flexibility and different tips and reasons why flexibility is going to be essential to your successful homeschool journey. And we're also going to talk about schedules and routines. So I'm going to get to it because it's a lot of information. Um, for some of you out there, you simply don't have the flexibility um, that I'm going to be primarily discussing in setting schedules and routines on your own because you're reliant on uh, your virtual public school or your um, virtual schooling where you don't have control over what time things are happening. Okay, so I just want to say and emphasize yet again, you are doing a wonderful job. All right, in impossible circumstances. So this is unprecedented times of stress and pressure. You're trying to do school at home, you're trying to work from home, or maybe you're working away from home, and now you have to figure out how your kids are going to do school at home virtually. Um, and thankfully, there's a lot of really great grandparents and aunts and uncles and daycare employees out there that are making this work. So great for you guys. I hope it's going well, and over the last few weeks, you've been able to smooth things out. I know in my circle of friends, it was rough at first, and now people are kind of finding what works best for them. I hope that's the case for you, and people can just keep pitching in and making it work, right? So take deep breaths, be kind to yourself. This is not ideal, so be hopeful and optimistic. My biggest thing, though, for anybody, regardless of what type of schooling you're doing right now, is make time to be outside. And I know I talked about that a lot in my other episode of Homeschool Support, which is still up. I talked a lot about how to get outside, the benefits of it, and how to make it enjoyable. So go view that if you haven't yet, and that's something that you would like to explore and work on. So I feel strongly about that, and there's many much more experienced and knowledgeable professionals in the fields of science and mental health that feel strongly about that. They're saying the same thing. This is key. Being outside is going to be key to lowering stress, lowering your risk of depression, eliminating or alleviating frustration and feelings of isolation. And it really is just a fantastic antidote to the higher amounts of screen time that most of us are getting right now. So be outside away from screens. Try to balance out the way life is right now. And for kids, especially, that's going to be so important because there is, for most children, a level of frustration when they're relying on these virtual meetings or just schoolwork on a screen more so than they're used to. That can be fatiguing. So, also, something that's important to mention too is that physical activity, whether it's outside or inside, doesn't matter. It can help tremendously with alertness, motivation, and attention. Okay? So, in fact, prepares your brain chemically to receive new information. So, we already know it's good for our physical health, but it's important for our mental health as well. And our ability to learn is enhanced. It becomes more effective when we have physical activity. So when your kiddo is at the computer and they are super antsy, they're grouchy, their emotions are unstable, that could be a huge sign to you that they need a physical activity break. So make time for physical activity. Sometimes when my son is struggling with a subject or math problem, it happens a lot with math. He gets stuck. We take a 5-minute break. We run around outside, tell him to chase the cat. We do jumping jacks or just a little physical activity around the house. Then we come back and we tackle the subject or the problem. Again, you might not have the flexibility to do that whenever you want, but I promise you that by making physical activity a priority in your routine for your kids, for your whole family, really, whenever you can, that's going to have a positive impact on school. So, um, whether you're actually struggling with it or not, or your kids are actually struggling with it or not, physical activity is going to help them learn more successfully. Okay, so let's also address what really does apply to everyone that is doing school at home. Whether you are logging onto virtual public school or cyber school or traditional homeschooling, this is not a brick and mortar waking up, getting dressed, going to school, and sitting in a classroom. It just isn't. That's a fact. And if you're stuck in a tunnel of trying to make it that way, one of my best pieces of advice is to break free from that ideal because it's not going to happen. This is different. It's unique. It's going to change. There's going to be seasons to your life of how things go, and that's okay. But if you leave that ideal and you become more flexible, you're going to be more willing to roll with the punches. You're going to be willing to take a look objectively at your circumstances and make changes if that is called for. And I feel, especially for those that are leaving public school for the first time and they're doing traditional homeschooling for the first time, this is pretty important. In fact, that's why many homeschoolers and homeschooling communities really advocate for doing what's referred to as de-schooling. So taking time to really shed this idea of what school should be. That's completely based on the everyday public school experience so that you can transition into a new path of learning for you and your family. So deschooling, that's something that you might hear about as you research your homeschool journey. It's not something we personally had to do, but I can absolutely see how it would be beneficial. Again, in addition to that, we're talking about flexibility of the schedules and what you imagine your school at home should be like. But um, I also want to say, while absolutely having a space in your home that is a learning space is great, um, you know, you can kind of break away from this idea that every kid in your family needs a desk and you need a blackboard and you need, all these things to replicate a classroom. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those things, because there's not. I use a chalkboard sometimes if some kids work very well at a desk. Not saying that. What I am saying is that you can put oodles and oodles and oodles of money into turning your home into a school. And it's just not. It's not a public school. It's your home. And that is okay. In fact, my recommendation is to lean into that. I think the best homeschooling success happens when you take your life at home and your academic learning and you marry them together so that you oftentimes can't even tell the difference between the two. It's so fluid. It works well together. It's a lifestyle. So don't get stuck into this idea that you're taking public school and bringing it home because it will likely not work. It's kind of like putting a round peg into a square hole. So another way to be flexible is curriculum. For those of you who are choosing your curriculum, doing traditional homeschooling, most of the time when you decide this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this leap, you spend hours researching what the best curriculum for you and your family are going to be. Of course, because you want to choose something that you feel is the best. Occasionally, you do that and you get started with that curriculum and it's horrible. It doesn't fit for your family. Not that there's even anything wrong with it, it's just not a good fit for you. That's all right. Don't be upset if the curriculum you chose doesn't work for you. If you and your kids start to dread doing school because the curriculum that you were positive was going to be amazing for your family ends up not working, let it go. Don't force it. There's no need to force it. You have the freedom to move on from that and find something that's best. Or maybe you can take what you've been doing and manipulate it in a way that works for you. So, oftentimes, if you take every single lesson in a curriculum exactly the way it's laid out and you do every single little thing to the letter, you're oftentimes going to end up dreading that, you or your kid, or both. This was something I had a hard time personally with. It was kind of a learning curve. So in kindergarten, I had a lovely curriculum. I wouldn't change that for anything. It was great. But nature studies, the first half of the year, used books that are very popular to many homeschoolers, that the people love them. And they were very boring for us. We were not fans. In fact, my mom, who helps homeschool my son, typically a couple days a week, she specifically said, "Do not bring these books to my house again. I don't want to do them. They're a drag." And so I was making it work. We were reading them anyway, and I thought, we're gonna push through this. And then I realized, well, really the heart of the lesson is about the animal that the story is telling about in the book. So instead of forcing us to read stories that we just dreaded and we kept getting behind on this subject, instead, I just took the animal, we researched it on our own, we watched YouTube videos, and we read in the encyclopedia, and it was great. We learned a lot. Same thing, math last year was long and boring, and eventually we were doing like 2 hours of math every day for a 6-year-old, and I thought, why am I doing this? And so I just pared it down. There was a lot of copy work. I liked the curriculum itself. I liked how it was teaching concepts, but he was getting it, so we could move on. He didn't need to do those same problems a billion times, and that's what I found to be really time consuming. So make things work for you. Don't be a slave to the curriculum that you choose, and if it's really not working, move on to something else. Sorry, my cat came up. You want your education to be special, you want it to be enjoyable. And that's part of the freedom of homeschooling. That's why you chose this path, was to make education work with your lifestyle. So don't let the curriculum that you choose hold you back from that. And take breaks. Just take breaks. There's no reason. It's going to happen. But there's truly no reason that you should get locked into some type of test of wills with your kid. When it gets close to that point, just take a break. Walk away from whatever it is that's causing that test to happen and come back to it. You're allowed to do that. And again, if you can do physical activity, that's even better. Okay, so schedules and routines. There are many, many different ways of organizing your school day or week. And if you're starting off in a more traditional route of homeschooling for the first time, you're choosing how and when to do things, and that can be pretty overwhelming. So first, let's talk about the bigger picture. If you're doing traditional homeschooling in Pennsylvania, you can begin school as early as July 1st. That's the earliest time that you can file your notarized affidavit and objectives, okay? And then you must have your evaluation done and your paperwork in by June 30th of the following year. So that's your school year, the length of your school year potentially, July 1st to June 30th. So maybe, and you need 180 days of school within that time period. So some do just the traditional public school schedule of August to May. They take the typical holiday breaks off, and that's great. That works for many people, and especially if this might be your first year homeschooling, there might be a lot of comfort in that routine, and so maybe you want to do that especially for your first year. But there is more flexibility than that, so you could do year-round homeschooling. whether that means you do a lighter schedule the whole year. Some families choose to do that. Or maybe you do a modified schedule where you do a few weeks on, a couple weeks off, a few weeks on, a couple weeks off. You're really in control of how you want to do that, which is really a large freedom that might actually seem super overwhelming, but you can make that work for you. So you don't have to get locked into thinking that your school at home has to be from August to May. You can switch that up, which is great. So for us, we've fallen into more of a year-round school from July to June, but really we kind of maintain a normal schedule. We just have the flexibility to take off when we want to. So if there's a big snowstorm and we want to spend a few days sledding and drinking hot cocoa, we can do that. Same thing with July and August. We did plenty of days of our normal homeschool routine, but on the beautiful days that we wanted to spend the entire day by the pool, we didn't have to think twice about it. We just went. So it gives us a big buffer. Also, if I get sick and I get a cold for a week, and then Mac gets a cold for a week, and then my husband gets a cold, if all of a sudden we've got 3 weeks of sickness, same thing. I don't have to stress about getting too far behind. I'm not making us do math while we're both groggy and out of it. We can just take that time. So I prefer it that way, but everybody's going to be a little bit different. But that's the point. You can make it work for your family. So as far as day-to-day or week-to-week schedules, though, a schedule, I think pretty much everybody can visualize what that would look like. So you're talking about a very locked in times, more akin to public school. You wake up and you have math at 9 a.m. every single day. You have language arts from 10:15 to 11, and it's modeled more after that typical brick and mortar schedule. And for some people, that works very well for them. It does not work very well for me, but for some people, that works very well, and they need that structure and they thrive on it. And for some kids, that's really important, and that's okay. However, I would just say if you are a slave to a schedule and you rely on that so heavily, that can be very risky. So you're at a risk of getting behind and getting stuck in a loop of constantly trying to catch up and not living up to your expectations, your ideal. So once you get behind, you start playing catch up, things get really tough, and you get disappointed, you get frustrated. If you have enough flexibility, even if you do that more strict scheduling, if you still view it through a flexible scope, your schedule is going to be much more attainable. So don't hold yourself to some ideal standard that you're likely going to let yourself down. Make it attainable. You also could potentially, if you get really into this, like 8 a.m. to 9:15, and from 9:15 to 10 o'clock, and we eat lunch at 11:45 every day, you could also potentially miss out on one of my favorite parts of homeschooling, which is that you have the freedom to pursue interests when they come up. You dive down rabbit holes. If your kid starts asking more questions about something you're learning about in science, you have the freedom to say, that's a great question, let's research it. Or if you get asked on a last minute play date, you can say, yeah, of course, we'll do that. If you get your 50% off coupon for homeschool days for the zoo, you can pick up and do that. Or if your museum pass comes in at the library, by the way, we have museum and zoo passes for free, but you can't control when they come in. So if you get your pass in, and then you can switch things up and you can take advantage of that. So if you're flexible, it's definitely worth it. I think that really is the fun of homeschooling. As far as routines, if you're going to look at it as a difference between a schedule, something that's highly scheduled like appointments, versus a routine where you have a rhythm to your day, you have a couple different options, and I'll just go over the two big ones, okay? So Probably the next step away from traditional, heavily scheduled schedule would be a block schedule. So, a block schedule would be, you say, from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., we're going to do language arts and we're going to have outdoor playtime. But how you divide those 2 hours is flexible. So some days you might spend 20 minutes on language arts and the rest of the time you're playing in the mud kitchen, and that's fine. Other days you take a 30-minute hike and the rest of the time you're spending on language arts. From 11 to 1, you know that you'll do lunch and some puzzles and board games. Some days you're hungry by 11:30, other days it's a little bit later. What board games you're going to play is completely up to how you feel that day. It's not set in advance. So there's a framework there, but a lot of wiggle room in between. And then there is loop scheduling. And loop scheduling is pretty cool. So loop scheduling is basically framework too, but even a little bit more vague and flexible. So here, see if you can. This is from, I think it's Pam something. She has a bunch of free schedules for block schedules and loop schedules, but I think loop scheduling, you kind of have to see it. So what you would do is, or I'll say this, the more common way to do it, because there's different ways you can do this a little bit too, is to write your subject. Typically what would go up here would be, say, math daily. And then say you have a set schedule for history on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So you have maybe a couple items up here that are pretty set in their ways. Then down here would be all your other flexible items. Maybe biology, geography, and a couple other things. Or maybe you have like music lessons up here on Tuesday and you have history down here. So you make a list and then you just work through, you have your set things up here, and then you work through these items. You work your way down the list, check them off. When you get to the bottom, you loop back around to the top and you go again. If it doesn't always happen on the same days, it doesn't always happen in the same time frame, but you just keep looping through that schedule. So for us, we probably do kind of a hybrid of both the block scheduling and the loop scheduling. More often closer to a loop schedule, but I do a little bit of block scheduling too. You know, there's certain things that we have to kind of work around my work schedule, appointments and stuff like that. And so I might have set a little bit more finite goals, like we have to accomplish this by 11 a.m. So, yeah, lots of different options out there. That's a pretty brief look at block scheduling and loop scheduling, but just a couple ideas. Again, you're making this work for you. The other thing I wanted to mention when we talk about routine and homeschool rhythms is one of the staples of many families, and we have used this throughout the years. I mean, I say that like it's been, we have used this before, but we don't all the time. So that would be a morning basket. So many people use this as part of their daily routine to usually includes reading. Sometimes it will also include things like memorization of poetry or Bible verses, or maybe you include songs in the routine. Sometimes it might have something like flashcards or language practice, I've seen, geography, just little tiny things that aren't totally time consuming, but you want to make it a habit to do it every day. And I would say for most people, it does, at the core, is reading with, while the kids might do something kind of like busy work, like puzzles or knitting or crocheting. The point, though, of the morning basket is to have a good transition into your day, into when you're doing your homeschool, your work, your schoolwork. It marks the beginning of your schoolwork, and it sets a peaceful tone to your routine. before moving on to other subjects. And for many, many homeschool families, this is truly a foundation of their routine or their schedule. So I definitely think that it is something that, while it isn't something we have always incorporated personally, it's absolutely something I encourage people to look into and try, because it could be a very powerful tool and an asset for your family and for your kids. If you need a little bit more of a transition between jumping out of bed and eating breakfast and diving right into math, um, a morning basket is a great way to set the tone for the day and to really get your mind ready for the schoolwork that's ahead. So it can be a very powerful tool. Many homeschool families just they live by that. So that is all I have for today. It was a lot, and hopefully it was helpful. Um, and hopefully things are going well for you. Now we're in October, so likely you've been doing school for a few weeks now, a couple months, and let me know if you have any homeschool questions. I'd be happy to help if I can. Have a wonderful day.